American husband thought his Indian wife died 6 years ago until he found her at a wedding. The moment that shattered Daniel Roberts' carefully rebuilt existence occurred at precisely 4:17 on a humid Saturday afternoon in August 2024, during his cousin's elaborate wedding celebration at the Drake Hotel in Chicago, when he glanced across the crowded reception hall and saw his wife Neha Kapoor laughing at a corner table, her hand intertwined with another man's, wearing the exact same emerald earrings he had bought her for their first anniversary 12 years earlier. The shock of recognition was so complete and devastating that Daniel's champagne flute slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a crystalline explosion that seemed to echo the destruction of every assumption he had built about death, grief, and the woman whose supposed drowning in Goa 6 years earlier had defined every lonely day of his existence since that terrible phone call from Indian authorities. Neha's appearance had changed subtly but unmistakably. Her once long hair now fashioned in an elegant bob, her skin bearing the glow of someone who had spent years in carefully maintained comfort rather than the decay of death. Her laughter carrying the same musical quality that had first captured his attention during their graduate economics seminar at Northwestern University 13 years earlier, when she was simply an ambitious student from Mumbai rather than a ghost returned to torment his fragile peace. The wedding celebration around Daniel continued in oblivious festivity, while his world collapsed into fragments of memory and impossible reality, guests chatting and dancing as he stood frozen, in recognition of someone whose funeral he had attended, whose memorial he visited monthly, whose life insurance policy had been settled after extensive legal proceedings that confirmed her death in the treacherous waters off Anjuna Beach during what was supposed to be a romantic anniversary vacation. Daniel Roberts had built his identity as a widower around the narrative of tragic loss, transforming from an optimistic young accountant who believed in permanent love into a reclusive professional whose emotional life had been permanently severed by what he accepted as cruel fate rather than deliberate deception designed to facilitate his wife's escape from their marriage and her obligations to the life they had constructed together in suburban Chicago. The 6 years that followed Neha's supposed drowning had been marked by Daniel's systematic withdrawal from social activities and romantic possibilities, despite persistent encouragement from family and friends, who watched him transform into someone whose capacity for joy seemed permanently damaged by grief that he wore like armor against further emotional vulnerability or the possibility of experiencing such devastating loss again through new relationships. His mother Margaret's persistent suspicions about the circumstances surrounding Neha's death had been dismissed by Daniel as protective maternal instinct rather than legitimate concerns about inconsistencies in the official accident report, witness testimonies that never quite aligned, and Neha's increasingly secretive behavior during the months before their fatal trip to India that had included unexplained phone calls and financial activities. The memorial rituals that Daniel had established around Neha's death included monthly visits to her empty grave in Graceland Cemetery, annual charitable donations made in her memory to organizations supporting drowning victims, and the preservation of their shared apartment exactly as she had left it, creating a shrine to suspended time that prevented him from moving forward while maintaining connection to someone he believed existed only in memory. The financial arrangements that had followed Neha's death included substantial life insurance payouts that Daniel had deposited into savings accounts he never touched, viewing the money as blood payment for his failure to protect her during their anniversary vacation, though the guilt that consumed him was based on false assumptions about events that had never actually occurred according to the official narrative. The investigation into Neha's drowning had been hampered by jurisdictional complexities between Indian authorities and American consular officials, leaving many questions unanswered, despite extensive search efforts that had failed to recover her body from waters that local fishermen described as particularly dangerous during monsoon season, when strong currents could carry victims from shore within hours. The psychological counseling that Daniel had undergone during the first 2 years after Neha's supposed death had focused on processing grief and survivor guilt, rather than examining the possibility that his fundamental assumptions about her character and their relationship might have been systematically manipulated by someone capable of elaborate deception, for reasons he had never suspected or investigated. The recognition that froze Daniel's entire nervous system as he stared across the wedding reception was accompanied by the immediate realization that Neha was not alone, but appeared to be attending the celebration as someone's romantic partner, her body language displaying the intimate familiarity of a couple who had been together for years, rather than the awkward politeness of casual acquaintances or recent romantic interests. The man sitting beside Neha was approximately 40 years old, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to success and social prominence. His expensive suit and gold watch suggesting substantial wealth, while his attentive behavior toward her indicated a serious romantic relationship that had clearly developed over an extended period, rather than being a recent casual encounter or business association. Daniel's immediate impulse to approach Neha directly was complicated by the surreal nature of his discovery and his fear that grief-induced hallucination might be causing him to misidentify a stranger who bore only superficial resemblance to his dead wife, though the distinctive scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident in Mumbai provided unmistakable confirmation of her identity. The wedding reception around Daniel continued in oblivious celebration, while he struggled to process the implications of Neha's presence, his mind racing through possible explanations that ranged from mistaken identity to miraculous survival to elaborate deception, each possibility carrying devastating consequences for his understanding of the past 6 years and his fundamental beliefs about love, truth, and human nature. The decision to discreetly photograph Neha and her companion using his smartphone was driven by his need for evidence that would survive his departure from the wedding reception, creating documentation that could be analyzed later when his emotional state was more stable, and he could think rationally about the appropriate response to discovering that his supposedly dead wife was alive and apparently thriving. Margaret Roberts' immediate concern when Daniel called her from the hotel bathroom was evident in her voice as she listened to his breathless explanation of what he had witnessed, though her response reflected years of harbored suspicions about Neha's death, rather than complete surprise at the possibility that their worst fears about deception and abandonment might have been justified all along. The private investigator that Margaret recommended, James Morrison, specialized in missing persons cases and insurance fraud, bringing 25 years of experience in uncovering elaborate deception schemes to Daniel's situation, while maintaining the discretion necessary for investigating someone who had successfully evaded detection for 6 years. Through sophisticated identity management and international mobility. The initial background check that Morrison conducted on Neha's companion revealed his identity as Rahul Desai, a successful London-based businessman with extensive connections in the Indian diaspora community and legitimate wealth derived from import-export operations that provided cover for international travel and the financial resources necessary to support a comfortable lifestyle for himself and his partner. The social media analysis that Morrison performed using specialized software revealed that Neha had been living under the identity Anita Sharma for at least 3 years, with carefully curated online profiles that suggested a successful career as a cultural consultant while avoiding any photographs or information that might connect her to her previous life as Neha Kapoor or her marriage to Daniel Roberts. The financial investigation that Morrison initiated revealed sophisticated money laundering activities that had enabled Neha to access substantial funds during her years of assumed death, suggesting either pre-planned theft of marital assets or ongoing criminal activities that had financed her comfortable lifestyle, while Daniel struggled with grief and the practical challenges of rebuilding his life as a supposed widower. The confrontation between Daniel and Neha took place 3 days after the wedding reception, orchestrated by private investigator Morrison, in the neutral setting of a downtown Chicago cafe, where Neha had been lured under the pretense of a business meeting with a potential client, creating a controlled environment for their first conversation in over 6 years. Neha's initial reaction to seeing Daniel was pure terror, followed by desperate attempts to maintain her false identity as Anita Sharma, claiming that he had mistaken her for someone else, despite the obvious recognition in her eyes and her instinctive use of his childhood nickname during their first moments of shocked interaction before she could construct appropriate deception. The psychological manipulation that Neha employed during their confrontation was sophisticated and immediate, combining genuine tears with claims about amnesia and false identity caused by the drowning accident that had supposedly erased her memory and left her unable to remember her previous life or return to their marriage due to medical complications that prevented proper identification. Daniel's emotional response oscillated between overwhelming relief at discovering her survival and devastating rage at her betrayal, creating psychological chaos that was complicated by 6 years of grief and guilt that had been based entirely on her systematic deception rather than tragic accident or his failure to protect her during their anniversary vacation. The details that Neha reluctantly revealed about her escape plan included months of preparation involving document forgery, financial manipulation, and coordination with criminal networks that specialized in helping individuals disappear from their previous lives while establishing new identities that could withstand casual scrutiny from law enforcement or private investigators. The financial crimes that accompanied Neha's staged death included systematic theft of joint bank accounts, fraudulent insurance claims, and tax evasion that had enabled her to maintain a comfortable lifestyle in London, while Daniel struggled with both emotional devastation and the practical challenges of managing their shared debts and financial obligations as a supposed widower. The revelation that Neha had been living with Rahul Desai for over 4 years under the identity of Anita Sharma created additional layers of deception that extended beyond her abandonment of Daniel to include systematic fraud against her current partner, who believed he was engaged to someone whose entire personal history had been fabricated through criminal identity theft and document forgery. Detective Samir Patel of the Goa Police, who had handled the original drowning investigation, expressed minimal surprise when contacted about Neha's reappearance, acknowledging that inconsistencies in witness statements and physical evidence had always suggested the possibility of staged disappearance rather than accidental death, though jurisdictional limitations had prevented thorough investigation. The international legal complications surrounding Neha's crimes involved multiple jurisdictions and criminal charges ranging from fraud and identity theft to conspiracy and immigration violations, creating procedural challenges that would require extensive cooperation between American, Indian, and British law enforcement agencies with different legal systems and investigative capabilities. The media attention that the case began to attract through journalist Emily Carter's initial reporting brought widespread coverage of staged disappearances and marital fraud, highlighting the sophisticated techniques that could be employed by individuals seeking to escape their responsibilities while causing devastating emotional damage to family members who believed they had died tragically. The psychological evaluation that was arranged for Daniel through his attorney documented the comprehensive trauma associated with discovering that his most intimate relationship had been systematically manipulated by someone capable of elaborate deception for purely selfish purposes, requiring specialized therapeutic intervention for rebuilding his capacity for trust and emotional intimacy. The impact on Rahul Desai was immediate and devastating when he learned about Neha's real identity and criminal background, forcing him to question every aspect of their 4-year relationship, while also facing potential legal consequences for unknowingly harboring a fugitive and participating in activities that might constitute conspiracy or accessory charges depending on his level of awareness. The criminal investigation that expanded beyond Neha's individual actions revealed connections to professional identity theft networks that specialized in helping clients disappear from their previous lives while establishing new identities that could withstand scrutiny from law enforcement, immigration authorities, and private investigators hired by abandoned family members seeking answers about mysterious disappearances. The forensic accounting that was conducted by federal investigators uncovered sophisticated financial manipulation that had begun months before Neha's supposed death, including the systematic liquidation of joint assets, establishment of offshore accounts, and coordination with money laundering operations that had enabled her to access substantial funds while maintaining her false identity in London. The international cooperation required for investigating Neha's crimes involved law enforcement agencies in the United States, India, and the United Kingdom, creating jurisdictional challenges that required careful coordination of evidence gathering and witness testimony across different legal systems, while addressing various criminal charges that applied to her activities in multiple countries. Detective Samir Patel's re-examination of the original drowning investigation revealed evidence that had been overlooked or inadequately pursued during the initial inquiry, including witness statements that contradicted the official timeline, financial records that suggested pre-planned departure, and forensic evidence that was inconsistent with accidental drowning in the reported location. The victim impact statements that were prepared by Daniel and his mother documented the comprehensive damage caused by Neha's deception, including not only obvious emotional trauma but also practical consequences of living for years under the shadow of grief, social isolation, and financial stress that resulted from insurance settlements and legal proceedings based on fraudulent death claims. The psychological profile that investigators developed based on interviews with people who had known Neha in her various identities revealed a complex individual capable of maintaining elaborate deceptions while appearing to form authentic emotional connections with multiple people who had no awareness of her systematic dishonesty and criminal activities spanning over a decade. The legal precedents that were being established through Neha's prosecution influenced how similar cases would be investigated and prosecuted in the future, creating frameworks for international cooperation and victim protection that would benefit other families, dealing with staged disappearances and elaborate identity fraud schemes that exploited marital trust and cultural expectations. The sentencing considerations focused on determining appropriate punishment that would reflect both the financial scope of Neha's crimes and the psychological damage she had inflicted on multiple victims, while also considering the international implications of the case and its potential deterrent effect on others who might consider similar criminal activities involving staged death and systematic identity theft. The financial restitution proceedings were complicated by the international nature of Neha's crimes and the sophisticated methods she had used to hide assets across multiple banking systems and jurisdictions, making complete recovery of stolen funds unlikely despite extensive efforts by forensic accountants and asset recovery specialists working across 3 countries. Rahul Desai's cooperation with investigators provided crucial information about Neha's activities and behavior during their 4-year relationship, though his testimony was complicated by his emotional attachment to someone whose entire identity had been constructed through criminal deception and his own potential legal exposure for unknowingly participating in immigration fraud. The media coverage that surrounded the investigation brought sustained attention to the phenomenon of staged disappearances and marital fraud, highlighting the sophisticated criminal techniques that enabled individuals to evade detection while living under false identities in foreign countries where their true backgrounds were unknown to local authorities and social contacts. The ongoing investigation into criminal networks revealed that while Neha had been successfully apprehended, similar operations continued to evolve and adapt their techniques to exploit new technologies and social platforms while incorporating traditional methods that remain difficult for conventional law enforcement to detect and counter effectively across international boundaries. The civil litigation that followed Neha's criminal conviction enabled Daniel to pursue additional compensation for the comprehensive psychological and financial damage she had caused, while also establishing legal precedents for holding criminals accountable for the long-term emotional impact of elaborate deception schemes that exploited marital trust and cultural expectations for predatory purposes. The international media attention that the trial attracted brought widespread coverage of staged disappearances and identity fraud, highlighting the sophisticated techniques that could be employed by individuals seeking to escape their responsibilities, while causing devastating emotional damage to family members who were left to mourn fabricated deaths and struggle with unanswered questions. The victim advocacy work that emerged from Daniel's case included specialized organizations dedicated to supporting families affected by staged disappearances, while also lobbying for legislative changes that would enhance protection for potential victims and improve law enforcement capabilities for investigating such sophisticated criminal schemes that crossed international boundaries, exploited jurisdictional limitations. The psychological research that was inspired by the case contributed to enhanced understanding of the long-term impact of systematic deception on victims' mental health and their ability to form trusting relationships, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions for individuals recovering from fundamental betrayal by people they had loved and trusted completely. Margaret Roberts' vindication regarding her persistent suspicions about Neha's death created complex family dynamics as Daniel was forced to acknowledge that his mother's concerns had been legitimate rather than overprotective maternal instinct, though their relationship was strengthened through shared experience of victimization and mutual support during the difficult legal and emotional recovery process. The financial recovery efforts extended over several years as investigators worked to trace assets that had been hidden or spent by Neha during her years of assumed death, with partial success in recovering some funds, while also establishing important legal mechanisms for pursuing criminals who had fled to foreign countries after committing elaborate financial crimes. The community response in Chicago reflected broader cultural concerns about trust within intercultural marriages and the vulnerability of individuals to deception by partners who exploited cultural differences and family expectations, though most reactions emphasized sympathy for Daniel's victimization rather than broader generalizations about international relationships or immigrant communities. The technological solutions that were developed in response to the case included better systems for detecting identity fraud and monitoring suspicious financial activities, while also providing tools for families and law enforcement agencies to verify identities and track individuals who might be living under false documentation in foreign countries. The educational initiatives that grew from the case included programs designed to help individuals and families recognize warning signs of potential deception, while also providing information about legal protections and investigative resources available to people who suspected they might be victims of systematic fraud or identity theft by trusted family members or romantic partners. The policy changes that resulted from advocacy efforts included enhanced verification procedures for death certificates and missing person cases, improved coordination between agencies investigating financial crimes and staged disappearances, and strengthened international agreements for pursuing criminals who exploited jurisdictional boundaries to evade accountability for their actions. The ongoing psychological treatment that Daniel received addressed not only the trauma of Neha's betrayal, but also the complex process of rebuilding his identity as someone whose fundamental beliefs about love, trust, and human nature had been shattered by discovering that his most intimate relationship had been based entirely on criminal deception and systematic manipulation. The relationship between Daniel and Dr. Patricia Williams, the trauma specialist who became his long-term therapist, evolved into a professional partnership focused on understanding and treating the unique psychological damage caused by elaborate deception within intimate relationships, contributing to academic research and treatment protocols that would benefit other victims of similar crimes. The establishment of the Daniel Roberts Foundation 2 years after Neha's conviction represented his transformation from victim to advocate, creating a permanent institution dedicated to supporting families affected by staged disappearances, while also funding research and prevention programs that address the sophisticated techniques used by criminals to exploit marital trust and cultural expectations. The annual conference on marital fraud and staged disappearances that the foundation sponsored brought together survivors, law enforcement officials, researchers, and policymakers from around the world to share knowledge about criminal techniques, while also developing more effective prevention strategies and support services that address the unique challenges posed by such elaborate deception schemes. The research initiatives that the foundation funded contributed to enhanced understanding of the psychological and social factors that motivated staged disappearances, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention strategies, therapeutic interventions for individuals and families recovering from the discovery that their most trusted relationships had been based on systematic deception. The victim support services that the foundation operated included specialized counseling for families affected by staged disappearances, legal assistance for navigating complex international legal proceedings, and practical guidance for financial and identity recovery processes that could extend for years after the initial discovery of criminal deception by trusted family members. The educational materials that the foundation produced provided practical information about recognizing warning signs of potential deception, while also raising awareness about the sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques used by criminals to exploit family trust and cultural expectations for elaborate fraud schemes that crossed international boundaries. The corporate consulting services that the foundation provided included risk assessment and fraud prevention training for organizations that might encounter individuals using false identities or engaging in systematic deception, while also supporting legitimate businesses that needed to verify customer identities and detect potential fraud without compromising privacy rights or cultural sensitivity. The international cooperation initiatives that the Foundation supported included enhanced intelligence sharing between law enforcement agencies and improved protocols for investigating missing person cases that might involve criminal deception, while also providing resources for diplomatic cooperation in pursuing criminals who had fled to foreign countries after staging their disappearances. The psychological treatment protocols that were developed through Foundation research provided specialized approaches for helping families recover from staged disappearances, while also addressing the cultural and social factors that could make certain individuals vulnerable to exploitation by criminals who understood how to exploit traditional values and family expectations for predatory purposes. The technology initiatives that the Foundation supported included development of better systems for detecting identity fraud and preventing staged disappearances, while also providing tools for families and investigators to verify identities and track suspicious activities that might indicate criminal planning or systematic deception by trusted individuals who exploited emotional intimacy for criminal purposes. The legislative achievements that resulted from the Foundation's advocacy work included enhanced penalties for staged disappearances and identity fraud, improved victim compensation programs, and strengthened international cooperation requirements that facilitated investigation and prosecution of criminals who exploited jurisdictional boundaries to evade accountability for their actions. The ongoing monitoring of criminal networks revealed that while specific individuals like Neha had been successfully prosecuted, similar criminal enterprises continued to evolve and adapt their techniques to exploit new technologies and social platforms, while also incorporating traditional methods that remain difficult for conventional law enforcement to detect and counter effectively. The professional development that Daniel pursued in victim advocacy included specialized training in trauma counseling, legal advocacy, and international crime investigation, enabling him to provide more effective support for other families while also contributing to improved prevention and response strategies within law enforcement and social service organizations. The romantic relationship that developed between Daniel and Sarah Mitchell, a social worker who specialized in helping families affected by international crime, required careful navigation of his trauma history, while also demonstrating that authentic love and trust were possible even after experiencing devastating betrayal by someone who had systematically exploited his capacity for emotional intimacy and cultural understanding. The cultural sensitivity that Sarah brought to their relationship reflected her professional experience working with multicultural families, while also providing Daniel with a perspective on healthy intercultural relationships that helped him distinguish between legitimate cultural differences and manipulative behavior designed to exploit cultural misunderstandings for criminal purposes and personal gain. The family integration that occurred when Daniel introduced Sarah to his mother Margaret required addressing the older woman's protective instincts and residual suspicion of romantic relationships that might exploit her son's vulnerability, though Sarah's professional credentials and genuine concern for Daniel's well-being eventually earned Margaret's trust and approval for their developing relationship. The international speaking engagements that Daniel undertook as a victim advocate brought him to conferences and educational events around the world, where his personal story illustrated the sophisticated nature of modern identity fraud, while also demonstrating the possibility of recovery and renewed purpose after experiencing devastating criminal betrayal by trusted family members. The media appearances that Daniel made in support of victim advocacy included television interviews, documentary participation, and podcast discussions that raised public awareness about staged disappearances, while also providing practical information about prevention and response strategies for individuals and families who might be vulnerable to similar deceptions by manipulative partners. The legislative testimony that Daniel provided to various government committees contributed to policy changes regarding international cooperation in criminal investigations, victim compensation programs, and prevention initiatives designed to protect vulnerable individuals from sophisticated fraud schemes that exploited cultural differences and marital trust for criminal purposes. The academic collaborations that emerged from Daniel's advocacy work included partnerships with universities and research institutions, studying the psychological impact of elaborate deception, contributing to scholarly understanding of trauma recovery, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions for victims of complex criminal schemes that exploited intimate relationships. The community outreach programs that the foundation developed under Daniel's leadership included educational presentations for schools, community groups, and religious organizations, raising awareness about the warning signs of potential deception while also providing practical guidance for maintaining appropriate skepticism without becoming paranoid or culturally prejudiced against legitimate intercultural relationships. The international partnerships that the foundation established with similar organizations in other countries facilitated information sharing and collaborative research, while also providing resources for families dealing with cross-border crimes that required coordination between multiple legal systems and law enforcement agencies, with different procedures and capabilities for investigating sophisticated fraud schemes. The technological innovations that were developed through foundation-funded research included improved systems for verifying identities and detecting fraudulent documents, while also supporting legitimate privacy protection and cultural sensitivity requirements that balance security concerns with respect for individual rights and cultural diversity in international relationships and business transactions. The psychological healing that Daniel experienced through his relationship with Sarah was facilitated by her understanding of trauma recovery, while also being challenged by his continued involvement in victim advocacy work that required him to regularly revisit his own experiences of deception and betrayal for the benefit of other families facing similar challenges. The marriage between Daniel and Sarah had provided him with a model of authentic intercultural relationship based on mutual respect and transparent communication, demonstrating that his capacity for love and trust could be rebuilt despite the devastating betrayal he had experienced through Neha's systematic deception and criminal exploitation of their marital bond. The 10-year anniversary of discovering Neha's survival marked a significant milestone in Daniel's journey from victim to advocate, as he reflected on the personal transformation that had occurred through his pursuit of justice, while also recognizing the broader impact that his case had achieved in protecting other vulnerable families from similar exploitation, deception by trusted individuals. The psychological research that had grown out of his case continued to advance understanding of the long-term impact of systematic deception on marital relationships, while also contributing to enhanced knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions and prevention strategies that could help both potential victims recognize dangerous situations and survivors recover from fundamental betrayal. The international law enforcement cooperation that had been essential for investigating Neha's crimes had evolved into permanent frameworks for combating staged disappearances and identity fraud, with specialized units in multiple countries sharing intelligence and coordinating operations that had disrupted numerous criminal networks while establishing protocols for protecting vulnerable individuals from systematic manipulation. The victim support services that had been enhanced in response to his case continued to provide specialized assistance for families affected by staged disappearances, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of effective support systems that helped survivors rebuild their capacity for trust and authentic relationships after experiencing systematic manipulation by trusted individuals. The educational impact of Daniel's story extended far beyond formal prevention programs to include widespread public awareness about the dangers of elaborate deception and the importance of maintaining appropriate verification procedures, even within trusted marital and cultural relationships that might seem immune to criminal exploitation by sophisticated predators who understood psychological manipulation. The policy changes that his advocacy had helped achieve continued to influence law enforcement procedures and victim protection measures, while also establishing legal precedents for prosecuting complex fraud cases and providing compensation for families who had suffered extensive emotional and financial damage through systematic criminal deception by trusted family members. The technological solutions that had been developed in response to his case continued to provide enhanced fraud detection and prevention capabilities, while also supporting legitimate identity verification needs for businesses and institutions that needed to protect themselves and their customers from sophisticated criminal schemes without compromising privacy rights or cultural sensitivity. The corporate partnerships that the foundation had established continued to produce innovative approaches to fraud prevention and victim support, while also providing resources for organizations that needed to balance security concerns with respect for cultural diversity and individual privacy rights in their operations, and customer interactions with multicultural populations and international clients. The international cooperation agreements that had been negotiated as a result of his case continued to facilitate beneficial collaboration between law enforcement agencies, while also supporting diplomatic relationships that balanced national sovereignty with international justice and victim protection in cases involving sophisticated transnational crimes that exploited jurisdictional boundaries. The ongoing monitoring of criminal networks revealed that while specific individuals like Neha had been successfully prosecuted, similar criminal enterprises continued to evolve and adapt their techniques to exploit new technologies and social platforms, while also incorporating traditional methods that remain difficult for conventional law enforcement to detect and counter effectively. The academic research center that the Foundation established at Northwestern University continued to advance understanding of identity fraud and elaborate deception, while also training the next generation of law enforcement officers, social workers, and victim advocates who would carry forward improved prevention and response strategies for protecting vulnerable individuals and families from sophisticated criminal manipulation. The documentary film that chronicled Daniel's story and its broader implications for understanding modern identity fraud received international recognition and educational use, raising awareness about the sophisticated nature of contemporary criminal deception while also illustrating the possibility of recovery and meaningful advocacy work following devastating personal betrayal by trusted partners. The establishment of international training programs for law enforcement officers investigating staged disappearances represented a lasting achievement of Daniel's advocacy work, providing specialized education about the sophisticated techniques used by criminals, while also promoting cultural sensitivity and victim protection in cross-border investigations that required cooperation between agencies with different procedures and capabilities. The legislative achievements that resulted from sustained advocacy efforts included comprehensive reforms to missing person investigation procedures, enhanced international cooperation requirements for criminal investigations, and improved victim compensation programs that recognize the long-term psychological and financial impact of elaborate deception schemes that exploited marital relationships and cultural expectations. The victim support network that had grown from Daniel's initial advocacy now served hundreds of families annually, while also providing specialized training for mental health professionals and legal advocates who worked with survivors of complex criminal deception, contributing to improved understanding of effective therapeutic interventions and practical support strategies for rebuilding trust and emotional intimacy. The technological innovations that continued to emerge from Foundation-funded research included advanced systems for detecting fraudulent documents and verifying identities, while also protecting legitimate privacy rights and cultural practices that required balanced approaches to security concerns and individual protection from government surveillance or discrimination based on cultural background. The international partnerships that the Foundation maintained with similar organizations in dozens of countries facilitated ongoing information sharing and collaborative research, while also providing resources for families dealing with cross-border crimes that required coordination between multiple legal systems and cultural contexts, with different procedures and expectations for investigating complex fraud schemes. The community education programs that had been developed reached thousands of individuals annually through schools, religious organizations, and community groups, providing practical information about recognizing warning signs of potential deception, while also promoting healthy skepticism that avoided cultural prejudice or paranoid suspicion of legitimate intercultural relationships and international business partnerships. The professional development opportunities that the Foundation provided for law enforcement officers, social workers, and victim advocates included specialized training in trauma-informed investigation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and international cooperation procedures that improved outcomes for families affected by sophisticated criminal schemes that crossed jurisdictional boundaries and exploited cultural differences. The ongoing case consultation services that the Foundation offered to law enforcement agencies and victim advocates around the world provided specialized expertise for investigating and responding to staged disappearances and identity fraud, while also contributing to improved understanding of emerging criminal techniques and effective countermeasures for protecting vulnerable individuals and communities. The annual conference that brought together survivors, professionals, and researchers continued to advance knowledge about prevention and response strategies, while also providing opportunities for networking and collaboration that strengthened the global community of individuals dedicated to protecting vulnerable families from sophisticated criminal exploitation that targeted marital relationships and cultural expectations. The research publications that emerged from foundation-supported studies contributed to academic understanding of the psychological and social factors that motivated elaborate deception, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions and prevention strategies that could protect potential victims and support survivors of systematic criminal betrayal by trusted partners. The psychological treatment protocols that had been developed through Foundation research continued to provide specialized approaches for helping families recover from elaborate deception, while also addressing the unique challenges faced by communities whose cultural traditions and family practices had been exploited for criminal purposes by sophisticated predators who understood how to manipulate trust and intimacy. The marriage between Daniel and Sarah, now celebrating their 7th anniversary with 2 young children, demonstrated that authentic love and trust were possible even after experiencing devastating betrayal, though their relationship required ongoing commitment to transparency and emotional honesty that honored both their individual healing needs and their shared commitment to protecting their family from deception. 15 years after Daniel Roberts believed his wife Neha had drowned during their anniversary trip to India, only to discover her alive and thriving at a Chicago wedding reception under a false identity with another man, his story continues to serve as both a cautionary tale about the sophisticated nature of modern deception and an inspiring example of how personal tragedy can be transformed into meaningful advocacy that protects vulnerable individuals. Worldwide, the Daniel Roberts Foundation has become an internationally recognized institution that has directly assisted over 700 families affected by staged disappearances and marital fraud, while also funding research and policy initiatives that have contributed to systematic improvements in fraud prevention, victim protection, and international law enforcement cooperation across dozens of countries and cultural contexts. The legislative changes that his advocacy helped achieve have been adopted across numerous jurisdictions and have contributed to more effective prosecution of staged disappearances and identity fraud, while also providing enhanced resources for victims and their families who need support navigating complex legal systems and recovery processes that are complicated by international boundaries and cultural factors. The international law enforcement cooperation that was essential for investigating Neha's crimes has evolved into permanent frameworks for combating elaborate deception schemes, with specialized units sharing intelligence and coordinating operations that have disrupted hundreds of criminal networks, while also establishing protocols for protecting vulnerable individuals from systematic manipulation and exploitation by trusted partners. The victim support services that were enhanced in response to his case continue to provide specialized assistance for individuals and families affected by staged disappearances and identity fraud, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of effective therapeutic interventions that help survivors rebuild their capacity for trust and authentic relationships after experiencing fundamental betrayal. The technological innovations that have resulted from foundation-funded research continue to provide enhanced fraud detection and prevention capabilities, while also supporting legitimate identity verification needs for businesses and institutions that must balance security concerns with respect for individual privacy and cultural diversity in their operations and community interactions. The educational impact of Daniel's advocacy work extends beyond formal prevention programs to include widespread public awareness about the dangers of elaborate deception and the importance of maintaining appropriate verification procedures even within trusted marital and cultural relationships that might seem immune to criminal exploitation by sophisticated predators who understand psychological manipulation. The ongoing impact of his advocacy work extends beyond individual protection to include systematic improvements in international cooperation, victim support, and fraud prevention that continue to evolve in response to new criminal techniques while maintaining focus on the human cost of crimes that exploit marital trust and cultural relationships for predatory purposes. The story of Daniel Roberts serves as a permanent reminder that while intercultural marriages and international relationships represent some of humanity's most valuable opportunities for growth and understanding. These meaningful connections must be balanced with appropriate awareness of the sophisticated criminals who exploit cultural differences and marital trust to facilitate devastating crimes. His legacy lives on through the thousands of potential victims who have been protected by the awareness programs his advocacy made possible, the hundreds of families who have received support through his foundation's services, and the systematic improvements in law enforcement and victim protection that emerged from his comprehensive response to personal tragedy, ensuring that his suffering was ultimately transformed into lasting positive change that continues to benefit vulnerable individuals and families worldwide.